I remember the day when Charlie Kirk it was announced that he had been assassinated. And you were actually with us. We're recording a number of programs. That was an awful day. I just want to go on record and saying it was evil. My heart goes out to his wife, family, and friends. But in the midst of that, I've been trying to understand the great divide. And I've seen it between Christians who say, wow, this was, you know what? It wasn't good what he did, blah, blah, blah. Or others who are standing up and saying, this has caused me to be more robust in my faith. And there have been baptisms, people coming back to church. So let's start with the question. Are they following Charlie Kirk, or are they following a legitimate prompting of the Holy Spirit? Or maybe a third thing, are they finding a new identity?
Yeah, and I think let's go to the third thing first, is that it is very tempting and very easy to try to create and modify an identity based on our circumstances and based on the news and what happens to garner a lot of attention, whether it's on social media and we get more likes because we post anti or pro Charlie Kirk stuff, whether we say he's a martyr or he's a political martyr or religious martyr. So I think there's a temptation to start to forge our own identities from that. I'm grateful for those who have created a more robust sense of their faith because they saw someone like Charlie Kirk who was very vocal about his faith. And what was interesting was, as far as I could tell, the trajectory of his statements and the things he was talking about started to get more and more heavily on the theological side and heavily on the gospel-centered side and less political. He was definitely political and he was a political animal, but he started becoming more and more on what is this core message that will actually fundamentally help the human beings he's trying to speak to. And so because he was so vocal about it in some pretty hostile areas, people are inspired to be more robust and more vocal about their faith. So apart from the identity that you can sort of like gravitate towards, and make yourself into this social media machine or this other thing, which we have to be very careful about, I think we can celebrate that people are really diving into their faith and saying, I want to be a bold witness too, despite the fact that it resulted in someone's assassination. In fact, what's interesting is that the Apostle Paul says to the Philippians that the brothers are more encouraged to speak the gospel boldly because of my chains. In other words, Paul was put in prison,
Exactly,
and that made his fellow Christians more bold. Well, chains were meant to do the opposite, but somehow there is this effect. When opposition comes, we get more bold. And that's what's happened. I thank God for that. But then there's also the identity of saying, I'm anti-him and I don't want to be one of the bad ones. I don't want to make sure I say things in a loving way and these kind of things. To that, I would say, be careful as well there, because you're free to disagree. And I think the person who would say, yeah, feel free to disagree with me would be Charlie Kirk. Yeah. He was known for that, saying, I want the disagreeers to come first. So he's okay with that. And as long as you understand that disagreement doesn't have to be hatred or outright denunciation, but just disagreement in an agreeable and a reasoned way, well, then we're going to be fine. So I think that's part of what we need to balance out. The problem, Mike, as I see it, is that in a social media world where the word of the year, Oxford Dictionaries always names a word of the year for Western culture. Mm-hmm. And last year in 2025, at the end of 2025, the word of the year was rage bait. Because what we see on social media, on television, in our conversations is this sense of baiting people into getting upset and raging against certain things. So we have to be very careful because we are so easily susceptible to rage bait.
very much.
And I would say one of the videos that I would ask someone to look at, if you wanted to see what was the heart of a message where someone who was diametrically opposed to something Charlie Kirk said, there's a video where he encounters a woman who identifies as a trans male. And he walks her through it and he says, hey, tell me your story. I want to hear, how'd you come here? How'd you get to this place? In front of thousands of people. He says, how did you get here? And then she tells the story. She says, I want to say thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that with me. What my hope for you is that we get a diagnosis that goes to the heart of the issue. What is the real underlying thing that's caused you to come to this spot you're in? And then as you get a honest to goodness, real diagnosis, then my prayer for you, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, is that you will eventually come to the point where you are psychologically comfortable with the biological body God gave you.
Love that.
There's nothing hateful about that. Everything about that is, I care about you.
Yeah.
I want you to be well. And so maybe he said some things we can disagree with. Feel free. But also remember, there are some things that we can say, even if I disagree with the ending message or the idea of, I don't want to affirm you, at least the heart is there. At least the heart is there. And I think that's what we need to get back to, is an understanding of assuming the best in each other, not starting off with believing in the worst in each other.